There have been some amazing developers doing apartments here in Melbourne, like Nightingale and Milieu. Those are phenomenal apartments. They are livable, they are spacious, they're boutique, they're well considered. I would love to see more of those.
Our motto is buy without regrets, and so
if you can buy a property that will serve you for 10 years as opposed to 3 years, that will serve you well. And something
buying a great property today, that's not just what it's about. It's also getting something that could be ripe for improvement when the time is right for that investor or for the next buyer.
You think about, right, lifestyle, what's important to you? How do you get to work? What do you need for your family? What amenities like parks and shops? Then you look at the budget.
Welcome to Street Secrets. I'm Chris Bates. I'm a mortgage broker since 2013. And in this podcast, we're going to be interviewing Australia's leading buyer's agents, ones with decades of experience, have the local insider knowledge on the street, and can really help you with your buying process, no matter whether you're a first home buyer, upgrade, or investor. In this podcast, you'll get access to Australia's leading buyer's agents' minds every week on a Thursday. What's the word on the street?
Welcome to Street Secrets. I'm Chris Bates. In the studio with a long-time friend, a fellow podcast host from the Australian Property Podcast, Amy Lunardi. How you doing?
I'm good, Chris. Very good.
Look, Amy, we do know each other very well, and for a long time as well, prior to even starting the Australian Property Podcast together, which is obviously a completely different show that we do together with Pete. But for those of you who don't know you and haven't heard about you, so we just sort of got to delve back to before you became a buyer's agent, when you started, your journey, both within other organizations, but also running your own show for quite a long time now. And how's it going? What's sort of the story? And when did it all begin?
Sure. So from a real estate perspective, I've had my own business since 2020. So in the 6th year now. And then before that was a buyer's agent working for other businesses since 2012. So yeah, I'm in my 13th, 14th year now. Gosh.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I studied economics, commerce at university, had no idea what I wanted to do, started working for the government in sustainability and economics, and very quickly realized that was not for me. The pace of government, and just had no passion in it. And I think it's really hard for anyone to find what they are passionate in. And I was always jealous of friends that I had who were working in the property industry, but I didn't have much exposure to it. But at some point I just decided, I took a pay cut from, I think I was on like 100 grand at 25 years old, whatever it was, down to 40 grand. Just to get my foot in the door in the property industry. Started off in leasing and then just was extremely lucky to get an entry-level job in buyer's advocacy, because it is quite hard to break into the buyer advocacy world. Sometimes people hiring will want at least some experience, like maybe being a real estate agent beforehand. But I got another entry-level job there, and I guess, the rest is history, Chris.
Yeah, I do think that background coming into buyer's agency is really important. I think everyone's, and I've said this on probably every podcast, to be honest, on here, but, it does give you a little bit of a unique skill set. And knowing you personally as well, not just, through professional sort of work as well, you do have a very analytical brain, and you do sort of have that sort of economic sort of background and educational background and thinking about things a bit deeper. Absolutely comes through. Is that sort of where you see it's really helped you as a BA when you've, obviously there's soft skills, but there's also technical skills. Like, what are some of the big benefits of your sort of prior history coming into becoming a BA?
I think that's always been a real strength of mine. I would say also sometimes to my detriment, in that I go too far with due diligence and I'm extremely risk averse. And I've also learned over the years through seeing other people make mistakes, things that I've learned during the course of the business, to say, okay, well, next time I will look at that differently. Even sometimes now I'll come across situations where, like, wow, that's a new situation in property that I haven't experienced before. And always I'm wanting to learn and improve because of my risk aversion, because I care so much about the client outcome. We are making these massive financial decisions alongside our clients. A lot of the time they are completely being guided by us. So for me, that's a lot of internal pressure. And my combination of having like high attention to detail, trying to think outside the box, think about all of the various scenarios, is good from a technical perspective, I think, but also then, like you said, you need a lot of soft skills in this job. We are managing with so many emotions, egos, opinions, and we're not just dealing with our clients, we're dealing with the agents, we're dealing with our clients' families, the vendors' families. You've got to really be in the middle to deal with so many different personalities. I think our job is a lot of counselor, relationship advisor, rather than just providing that technical information. Maybe that's why AI is in no danger of, in my opinion, taking over our job anytime soon, Chris. Maybe in the future, though.
I know you're very well up the tree than where they're going to be able to target, because you're right, there's so many emotions in it. I'm a bit further down the tree from a broking point of view, but even we have to, we're part of the process, probably not as integral, if I'm honest, around the emotions of buying and selling. And, you know, it moves way more into the property decision, which is absolutely where you're at. I mean, was that some of the harder parts is not only just the technical element of BA, but, and that's something you've got a lot better over the years in sort of really delving deeper with clients and helping and giving them a much better journey than probably the early days. And that's one of the challenges for a lot of BAs.
Oh, 100%. So every time you have an experience with anyone, whether it's your own clients or vendors or agents, I always think about it at the end. I'm like, okay, well, could I have done that differently? Learn from, you know, the way that certain people respond, certain personalities respond better. People who are more analytical will do better if you provide them with more data. Other times people are more emotional, and you have to really then understand, well, where is certain biases or previous experiences influencing this? So having also life experience, I think, you know, instead of being in my 20s, I'm now nearly 42, and I've gone through my own renovations, buying and selling. You know, I've met thousands of agents and people over that time period. So my own life experience now, I think, helps a lot when I'm managing people. And I also, I'm sure, you know, maybe you have this in your own business as well, Chris. I don't say yes to everyone who needs help, because I need to be confident that I can help them as well and get them an outcome. I don't want to charge people money if I don't feel like I can deliver them the results.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you've got to be able to give advice, but also someone has to be willing to listen and sort of take that on board. Otherwise, it gets pretty a bit of tension early on. And as brokers, yeah, absolutely. You know, the clients could potentially just say, oh, look, I want to go down a different strategy or whatever it is. At least we've given you as buyer's agents, it's a very close relationship. I say it when you're picking a buyer's agent is, yeah, absolutely. You might be able to find a few that are really technical experience, but you've got to have a connection with them personally, because I feel like it's you've got to have that trusting relationship to be able to be open both ways, right? The BA and also the client needs to be open and say, I'm not feeling this, or I'm worried about this, and having that difficult conversation, needs to not feel so difficult.
And I think on that, I was thinking the other day, if I wasn't a buyer's agent, would I be a selling agent? And they're quite different roles. A selling agent selling a product essentially, and, you know, we're more advisory. But I also was thinking about it, and people will hire me because they trust me. Whereas a lot of the time someone engages a real estate agent because they feel they have to. I mean, you can sell your own house if you really wanted to, but they're kind of then already not starting on a relationship built on trust. So for me, that's always something that I never take for granted. And, you know, if a client doesn't get the right vibe with me for whatever reason at the start, we just won't work together. But I always then need to, I never take that trust for granted. It's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. As a true trusted advisor, though, you've got to, not take any shortcuts and be there for them, through it all and answer the questions, even if they feel like they're silly to the client. They're not silly at all, right? They're just someone's where they're at in their journey and their knowledge. They just need some gaps and dots joined, and it's your job to sort of help them with that. I mean, today we're going to talk about the inner north of Melbourne, but I think you grew up in Melbourne. I think you grew up in the southeast. You mentioned around the life and the personal experience. I do think I've become a better advisor as I get older. It's just, you just don't know what you don't know. When kids come, the challenges with that, and so you're also in that same camp with a couple of young ones, but also the history within Melbourne. Do you think that really helps you as well? Just, not, for example, like a new person moving to Melbourne, how is that helping you as a BBA?
Oh, definitely. So having grown up in Melbourne, and I've lived in various locations, grew up in the southeast, worked in the West for 7 years, lived in the West briefly. Now I'm based in the North. But then I also do the inner eastern suburbs of Boroondara because I'm just become very familiar with them over the years, having clients there. And I think an extra little skill that I seem to have is I've just got a really good memory, and I don't know what it's called, like a map spatial awareness. Like once I learn about an area and a street and location, it becomes ingrained in me. And I think that's really worked to my advantage. But I've certainly become specialist in pockets. And if I've ever got clients who come to me and say, I'm looking in this particular area, I'll say, look, I'm not familiar with that location. I don't think I'm the best person to you. Here's someone else who I could recommend. Because having that intrinsic knowledge and having those relationships with agents too, I know that there's some, advocates that might say, oh, I've got all these relationships, but they've never actually, transacted with those agents or established a reputation in that area. So I think that you need to have feet on the ground. I couldn't even contemplate doing interstate, let alone a suburb that I'm completely unfamiliar with confidence.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think as you get more experience, you realize, I thought I knew that area, but then I didn't know it. I didn't know there was a rat run there, or was the locals in that area absolutely hated that pocket for X, Y, Z reason. And hang on a sec, you really need to know somewhere to actually help clients make good decisions. Even looking at data and past sales just isn't enough, right? So we talk about the Inner North. It's a very attractive pocket, right? Like, for first-time buyers, for investors, for upgraders, that want to, and even downsizers. So how do you think about it in terms of breaking it down in your mind, the different pockets, and how you sort of help clients, think about those different pockets?
I would say most of the time before someone comes to us, they've got a pretty firm idea of where they want to end up in terms of north, east, south and west. Occasionally we'll have some crossover with north and west because you've got somewhat comparable price points, not completely. But other times in the strategy sessions at the start, and we don't charge anything for what I call the homework phase, pardon the pun, with clients to get a really good sense of where they're looking. But I often encourage people, if they're looking at, say, a tiny townhouse closer in the southeast versus a big house in the middle ring north, say to them, like, the price might be the same, but that lifestyle and that strategy is completely different. So I would really encourage you to have a think about that before you then go on your purchase journey, because you're comparing real apples and oranges here.
Yeah. So when you go the Inner North, obviously you've got a few different train lines, right? You've got the sort of the Alpha, you've got the Northcote, you've got the Preston, and you've got the Brunswick, and and then you got like even Kensington. Like it's quite congested in there as well. Like what are some of the challenges that you find? And even though it's so close to the city, there's a lot to sort of understand, like you said, geographically around, where to avoid and where to look. And it's just a lot going on.
Yeah. And there are certain pockets in the north which are, much more high density social housing pockets, which we just always need to be mindful of, because that is something that impacts value, livability, etc. And I would say one of the bigger challenges from a livability perspective in the north is there isn't as much decent options for private schooling, if that's something which is important to people, same as the western suburbs in Melbourne. So then we do have quite a few families in the Inner North commuting to Boroondara, Kew, Hawthorn, etc. to get to those private schools. It's not ideal, but that's just, there's limited options there.
And is there good public alternatives? Because primary people are pretty relaxed with, but high school, they get a bit more nervous.
Yeah, there are a few, but certainly not of the same, I guess, decision-making. If you're comparing it to private schools, it's just different. But you can make the commute, but also you just get so much more bang for your buck in the north in comparison to, say, Boroondara. And therefore, people weigh up that decision of, well, maybe it's going to take me an extra 20-minute drive, half an hour drive each way, but I get to live in a much bigger house, and on the weekends I've got a bigger yard, and maybe they prefer the community of the north and the east. For whatever reason, they make that judgment call. But yeah, that's just one of the limitations we come up with north buyers.
Yeah, you mentioned high density in the north. Yeah, potentially, social housing, there's nothing wrong with that. But, like there's some challenges with, areas that are changing a lot and plus not. What's some of the other challenges in that pocket? I mean, when I think about it, I've got trains, you've got trams, you've got roads, you've got rat runs, you've got, some pockets that are backing onto commercial. What's some of the other things that you're really trying to help clients when they think about the inner north is, really be a bit nervous around these type of properties, try to drive them to certain pockets, access to green space. What are some of the other things?
Well, I think we just overlay the same as what we do in a lot of other areas in that just because a suburb, and this is where data can be really challenging, Chris, as you would know, because the data is generally broken down by a suburb basis. So the median values or, the properties that are going to perform best in one part of that suburb could be completely wildly different to another part of that suburb. So before you're starting to purchase, especially if you're not super familiar with that area, it's just getting intimate and really understanding what are the more desirable pockets, what are the less desirable pockets, but still nice areas. So that might be less desirable just because there's not as much amenity, but it's still lovely and family friendly. You might say, okay, well, my drive is longer to the shops or school or station, but that's fine, versus the pockets that are undesirable for reasons which are unchangeable and will impact your livability. For example, like you said, factories being more near the high density social housing pockets, just completely cut off by a freeway, for example. So always at the start, I'm helping to educate clients if they aren't as familiar, whereas some other of my clients, they know every single street in the suburb. I don't need to tell them what's going on. But then we say, okay, well, if you are only looking in one suburb and one pocket of a suburb, well, then either we're waiting a long time for the right property or we need to consider where else is going to give you similar options.
Yeah, have you noticed over the last sort of 5 years or whatever it might be that, you've had to sort of explore a little bit for, whether it's budgets, whether it's clients' appetite to spend less, whether it's they're wanting more, their buyer preferences have shifted, they're willing to go a bit further from the city because they get a bit more land and work from home and, and that's explored them to a place like Glenroy or, Reservoir or, are you finding that the buyers are also shifting and, are more open to the stereotypical, I want to be, Fitzroy or Brunswick or, Northcote, they're a lot of the northern buyers are a little bit more flexible on where they end up?
I have both because we've got those people who are, I guess, earlier in their stage of life who do prefer a bit more space, and they are the ones that I think I've got a buyer right now living in Collingwood. They're moving out to Greensborough, and she keeps saying, I can't believe I'm moving to Greensborough, but she's got 2 kids now and she just loves the idea of having that yard and local little community. Whereas I've got some other clients who perhaps they're downsizing and they're wanting to get back into the vibe. They've been living in the outer suburbs for a while and they want to live close to Gertrude Street or, in a great apartment in Stonington. So downsizers are also clients that we help. And yeah, they want to be living
in the action.
Living the vibe. Yeah, exactly. So I've got a mix of both.
And I think that's when you're looking at a property, right? Can it suit those multifaceted sort of demand, right? Like, so, the downsizers coming, would a young family like that? Would a couple want to, because you are still going to see those people at the first home buyers that are, pre-kid stage, just going, well, yeah, I'm happy to, or I'm not having kids, or I'm a single. And so, I mean, the sort of Greensborough pocket's an interesting one as well, right? That sort of Eltham, sort of Fairfield, sort of train line, like, what sort of drives people down there a little bit more? Because that's kind of also, I feel, personally, a little bit undiscovered compared to the stereotypical sort of Northcote train line.
Yeah, so getting more towards the Banyule location. So I've got buyers who will sometimes, for example, be looking at both Preston and Rosanna. So from a longitude perspective, if you look on the map, yes, Rosanna's a little bit further northeast, but they're sort of similar, not too far away from each other, basically. But if we go along that train line, it's very beautiful, leafy and green. There's a lot of vegetation overlays and landscape overlays, which really protects the greenery of those areas. Really peaceful, a lot quieter. The villages themselves are a bit more, they're not as trendy as if we're going along High Street, for example, through Northcote, Thornbury, Preston. But you take Greensborough as an example, and it's such a huge suburb too. We've got pockets which are a bit more, smaller blocks and quite flat versus going north of the freeway, very hilly, bigger blocks. Just, within each suburb, there's often little micro pockets that you need to be aware of. But I think somewhere like what's so near Greensborough, that's just a nice blend of for buyers who are wanting to get a little bit further out, more space without going all the way to somewhere like Eltham, where you do really feel like you're in, the suburbs, and, the houses are further apart, massive blocks, which is beautiful and suits the people who live out there. But yeah, some areas are, for certain buyers, undiscovered and unexplored. And I always say, go do that before we start working together if you're unsure. Let's get the locations down pat, because otherwise, just say we were saying, okay, well, maybe we'd consider Rosanna, and I find you the dream property within 2 weeks, and you say, oh, I really love this house, but I'm just not sure about the area. Let's figure out that area first, because then we don't want to miss out on the dream home because we're not sure if we want to live in that location. You've got to spend time in the area. You've got to drive around, practice the commute to work, go and hang out in the village for a few weeks in a row. Look at the people walking around. Because I can tell someone, hey, I love this suburb. Just because I love it doesn't mean they're going to love it as much as I do.
Yeah, I think there's sometimes people are worried about doing the work because they're going, hang on a sec, I might love it. And I was so pigeonholed on this idea and I can't deal with another idea. And then they get there, and I'm sure you've shown them properties and they're like, what, we can get this for our money in this location? And oh, wow, that's actually a really cute high street. And actually, we could see this happen. And I think that's what someone with a lot of knowledge can do. It's some, and also the ability to sort of challenge someone thinking and know intrinsically like other ideas. Oh yeah, this could be work. And part of your role is actually that hunting phase, right? It's sort of sniffing out the opportunities that sometimes you've got to be creative with them. And how does it sort of your agent relationships evolved over the years to allow you also to get better results, not just speed, but actually getting access and all the other things?
So I like to think that we've got a really good, when I say we, myself and, my business, we've got a great reputation in the real estate industry. I know, and this is just from agents talking to me, there are some buyers agents out there that they are not calling. They don't want to call because either they've burnt them in some way, they're hard work, like they don't trust them for whatever reason. I've always been very careful. There's plenty of agents out there who I really don't like them as people. We've butted heads now and again, but I have to be Switzerland in my job because I might need something from them in the future. As I'm never going to completely speak my full mind about, someone, because I have to preserve that relationship. But I think what I'm also very proud of is I put in the hard work in terms of my maintaining communication. I don't just send an email out every week. I don't just rely on, junior staff member to make these calls. Like I am making calls every day, every week to real estate agents. And I don't think that I know that all buyers agents don't do that. And I'm very proud of that because it's more work, but it helps to, first of all, get me access to things that I never would have known about. It makes me be front of mind for those agents as well. Just improves my reputation on their end too. So I think that that's, unbeatable with agent relationships, is just not relying on them contacting you and also not relying on just emailing them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen you do that with mutual clients there's nothing really, and then all of a sudden you've got this pre-market option on the table, you're getting access to it, and you've hustled to make that opportunity, from what I can see, right? That it wasn't even the agent came to you, it's because you called and that you created it. And there's, actually, you know what? I'm thinking about this one coming up in the future and that could be a good fit for what you're talking about. And all of a sudden you've, and so
I weasel my way in, Chris, if I get a sniff of anything. And also, I have plenty of agents who will tell me, hey, Amy, I missed this listing. It's going with another agent, but it could suit your client. They get nothing out of that for them, but they're doing it as a favor to me. So that, to me, I was like, okay, this is really great. They respect me enough to give me, a hot tip here. But it's just what I call polite nagging, constantly nagging the real estate agents. And last year, my long-term average is buying a third of our clients' properties off market. Last year, it was 75%. In winter, it was 90%, 90 last year. That was just through the sheer hustle. And I had an inquiry come through and it's like, I'll prove it, blah, blah. I'm like, I'm happy to prove all of this. I've got all the data and got all statistics. So I'm sure there's plenty of businesses advocates out there who say, we buy almost everything off market. But I think as a buyer, you have the right to confirm that, because I know we do a lot because we put in the hard yards to get those properties.
It is one of those touchy topics, right? It gets misused. Generally buying off market / pre-market is potentially an opportunity the market hasn't seen, and it was maybe, a really good deal, and it was a really motivated vendor, and you ended up getting a great result. Sometimes it's not the case with off markets, right?
Yeah,
so what do you?
Sometimes they're a waste of time. Although sometimes, Chris, they might be off market, perfect home for the client, not a bargain, sometimes even a very slight premium, but the client's like, I don't care. I need to have this property. I don't want to take the risks of it going online. As long as I can give them that information and explain to them, well, I think there's a X% chance that it's going to go over or under if it goes online. That's at least a decision that they can then make. But the whole point with off markets is to have more choice, and sometimes a bargain, which is a bonus.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a needle in the haystack, right? The search process, do you feel like you've got better and better?
Yeah,
finding the going, because it's not just the client's money, it's their client's time, right? And time could equal money. It might not, because the market might not be going anywhere, but sometimes really getting the client to push to press the go button when the right property comes on. Do you find that every year you're getting better at that, in terms of really, if you feel like something's a little bit off with the brief, or it's not achievable, or, they're wanting something that is just not going to happen, you're getting better. And then I guess, making that process much more enjoyable because you're dealing with it up front.
I've always just found that honesty is just the best form of client communication. And I've had one client at the moment for over 6 months, and I've just said to her, like, you've looked at more properties than all of my other clients almost combined. You've only had one green light. That to me suggests we need to have a shift in expectations, or, talk about what we change from here. More often I give clients their own tools, and I say, okay, this property, especially if we've only been looking for a few weeks, you really like this one. You're not sure if something better is going to come up. Here's a way to help figure that out. You do a benchmarking exercise. Let's talk about it. And then they'll say, oh, actually, it's a really good one based on that exercise you gave me. Let's go for it. And so it's instead of me telling them that, I help them realize it themselves. That's so much more powerful.
And potentially sometimes they're focusing on a sale or a property that they never saw. They never knew what actually happened on the sale.
Correct.
There's no photos, and they're like, well, if that's all for that, I don't want to pay this. And it's like, actually, there's a lot going on here that you don't know. And, and sometimes they're basically stuck in a process. And in terms of, the inner north and the different briefs, I mean, how are you sort of finding those different markets? You got like the starter ones, you got, say, maybe the mid-range, and then also you got this sort of the top end. And and how do you sort of help clients get confidence to sort of spend a bit more money in those markets when they, potentially, would often have thought, well, if I'm spending $2 million, I want to go to the east, or I want to go Bayside. But, that seems a lot in the north. But, how do you sort of counteract that and encourage them to say, well, no, you get a lot more for your money, I guess?
So what I said earlier before, they are usually pretty set on where they want to be before they come to me. The main difference is if I've got clients that are not familiar with Melbourne, and then we're going on a bit more of an education process around, okay, well, this is the type of properties we can get in these locations. This is the different pros and cons of all of these areas. Do you want the beach? Do you want the bush? Like, we have to go on a much more exploratory phase if they're either from interstate, or especially if they're expat, they haven't been here for a long time. So in which case it's a lot more reliant on me guiding them. But I would say more commonly, if someone's already living in Melbourne, they've got a pretty good sense of where they want to be, northeast, south or west. And, that's often because of friends, family, school, work, a lot of things.
I find that sometimes people are willing to sort of maybe spend a bit more. There's a bit of in Melbourne market in particular, I would say there's just a bit of conservatism around, not potentially, spending more money. I would find that's why it's not at the top of the market. Maybe you might not be finding that on the ground, but you do get a lot more value for money, I would say, at the moment than you have done in the previous. So when you think about the north, obviously there was sort of these natural sort of lines that people didn't want to go. Maybe it was Bell Street, or but there's new infrastructure happening with East West, and is there any sort of pockets that you're still finding are really hard for clients to sort of get their heads around, and they're not willing to sort of go on this side of the the freeway, or they don't want to go into this part of suburbs because it's really hard with public transport or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I would say the Ring Road, for example, like I rarely have clients that will look in both Reservoir and Thomastown Laylaw, for example, because it does just change quite a lot in terms of streetscapes, demographics, types of properties, amenity once you go over the freeway. The Bell Street thing is definitely a thing for some people, but I think that a lot of people have now realised that, you know, the stuff along High Street, the amenity is moving further north. We've got, you know, the Preston market, redevelopment plans, etc. And you just do get more land and more options a little bit more north, and it's a 5-minute drive to High Street, for example. But there are still pockets, you know, in, for example, around Hadfield and those areas where I, again, don't have as many people wanting to be in those areas because the amenity is just quite low. It's a bit, the public transport, the shops, all of that. Yeah, it's not uncommon. You have that wherever you go, and then those clients might say, well, instead of going deeper that way, let's just go into a completely different suburb to add into the mix rather than a neighbouring suburb. So I've talked to people over the years, especially investors, who have said this suburb has to perform because it's next to that suburb, because previously there's been that spillover effect sometimes where people get pushed out.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
sometimes people don't want to just go to the next suburb. They'd rather go to a different suburb because they need the train line, they need the shops. So it doesn't always work that way. And we've got little holes in, you know, Melbourne, certain areas where the values are much lower for those reasons, and then they're surrounded by more expensive locations.
Yeah, I think the last boom, it was like the pressure cooker to be close enough as you possibly can to the city, because everyone's going in 5 days and time is money, and, you know, we don't want to be, and as parents, you don't want to be too, you know, limit the commute time as much as possible. So high on people's buy preferences. And I think that's one of the things is you would just naturally, people would go to the next suburb because they're like, I don't want to be going too far because it's already feels a lot. I think maybe Melbourne shifted a lot, right, with the changes for work from home and people wanting space and, you know, wanting to spend more time in their local community rather than, you know, in the city. Awesome. So I think obviously with the Inner North, you've got, you know, lots of buyers. What would be the if you get those sort of cross briefs? You mentioned sort of the southeast. If you do find someone from an investment point of view, is there any other pockets you sort of also explore for clients?
Well, for investors, we always start off with, you know, the bigger parts of the brief, which is the budget, the yield requirements, the preferences around dwelling types. Some clients are like, I have to have a house with land. I don't care what you say, Amy, I have to have that. And then we're more limited in where we can look. Or other clients, like, I really want low maintenance, or I really want a higher yield, or for whatever reason. That then determines where we go. So I always start with that brief, and that brief will then say to me, well, we've got these options. For example, you know, a client who doesn't need a house on a full block, they still want an area which is quite well established and higher incomes. You know, we might do something like a villa unit on its own piece of land. It might be 2 or 3 in a block, but a good size one, so say $1.2 million you're spending, that will then appeal. We can get into a blue chip location. It'll be low maintenance, decent yield. And then we're appealing to first home buyers, but also downsizers and this aging population of people who are selling this, you know, multi-million-dollar houses, but still want to stay in that area. And then we say, okay, well, we need to make sure we have a garage. We need to make sure it's single level, all these things that then appeal to the baby boomers. So there's a lot that goes into the decision around the investment brief. I never would just say to someone, oh, we'll just go north because, you know, the north has performed and will continue to do so. Like, it has to suit the brief.
Yeah, I think, you know, typical, a lot of investors would be going, oh, I just want a house. That's what I had in Perth or Brisbane, or I know houses go up more than apartments, but you're right. It's exploring, is there anything that's offer like living in a house or like living, you know, that could offer you a similar lifestyle. Those villa units are very common in Melbourne. And then obviously got the new townhouses and the older type townhouses down there as well. And I think that you got the apartments, you got the older apartments and the newer apartments. Melbourne's built a lot, but it doesn't mean that everything's been going up at the same rate. Is there any parts of the north that you worry about though? Like, yeah, there is a desire to keep building, you know, Preston, if you mentioned before, or even Brunswick, and, you know, there is a high density coming. Is there any sort of, how do you sort of factor that into, your decisions when you're guiding clients? Do you try to stay away from them, and do you sort of are aware of where there's potentially more supply coming?
Well, there's mainly, when it comes to density, because we are in landlocked areas, it's really a case of either subdividing, and that is still, happening, and they've relaxed the laws around subdividing, which I actually think is great, because I think we need more townhouses and decent sized properties on land. But when it comes to apartments, I mean, that's always something that I've tried to avoid anyway, especially the newer apartments from an investment perspective. And there have been talks around, much higher density along High Street, for example. But it's also when it comes to planning, and I've learnt this over the last, decade plus, is just because something is proposed doesn't mean it will happen too. Like, just because something is allowed to happen doesn't mean that the developer and buyer appetite will filter through. If you've got a suburban street where you can build 4 stories up, and have these tri-level of, townhouses, do people actually want to buy those? So we definitely, whenever it comes to extra council changes or statewide planning changes, we want our clients to be aware of stuff and how that could introduce risk in the future. But I think for me, it more impacts the apartment market, because when we're talking about scarcity, like, these is mostly to do with going up rather than out. And I think it's great for these big blocks with old dilapidated houses to potentially put dual locks and those types of properties on and increase the density in an area of population without going up and utilising that extra land. Sorry, the land that's already there.
Yeah, what's possible, even if something gets lodged in application, is still a long process till it actually gets built and sold. And, can they actually sell it? Does there a buyer demand for it? Can people get finance for it?
You know what though, Chris, just on that with apartments, like, there have been some amazing developers doing apartments here in Melbourne, like Nightingale and Milieu. Those are phenomenal apartments. They are livable, they are spacious, they're boutique, they're well considered. I would love to see more of those. We've got a lot in, Fitzroy and Brunswick and the areas where people value them and will pay for them. But, I saw one recently, it was a 2-bedder, it sold for nearly $1.5 million in Brunswick. Like, that is beyond the affordability of a lot of apartment buyers. I don't know how there would be, encouragement for more of that to happen, because not everyone can afford it. But, those kind of apartments definitely buck the norm of, what we think of as traditional apartments. And this is why data can also be really challenging, Chris, is because data lumps units and houses. That's it. There's 2 categories. But within the unit category, you've got townhouses, villas, 2-box apartments, big apartments. Like, you can't look at them and make decisions based on that type of data, unfortunately.
Yeah, and then you've got in the apartments, you've got the ones that were warehouse conversions that have been done amazing in older buildings that are
totally
completely unique. And, obviously sometimes we challenges in those buildings, but sometimes, the scarcity of just the building being, part old, part new as well is just so desirable as well. So, yeah, I think there's a lot going on in that pocket. I do feel like you really need to understand that, what makes those suburbs tick, where the people really want to live, the streets they don't want to be on, the risks of development, roads, etc. And so sometimes, even though it's so confined, there's actually potentially even more complexity than, say, some of the fringe suburbs. And so thanks so much for coming on today, Amy. Obviously, we've worked with clients many times for many years. And, if you're looking to engage the team, you're in super safe hands. And so thanks so much for the chat today.
Thanks for the invite, Chris.
Thanks so much for listening today. We hope you got lots of value out of it. If you'd like to speak to our guest today, there's links in the show notes on how you can get in contact. And if you're buying your first home, upgrading, renovating, or need any finance-related queries, obviously we'd love to help. There's links in the show notes to us as a mortgage broker, and we look forward to next week's episode.